Selamlar arkadaşlar. Bugün Yev'le beraberiz. Yev, Amazon'da geo-ranking denilen farklı lokasyonlarda yani farklı zip kodlarında ürünlerin farklı sıralamalarda gözükmesini aslında hem marketing boyutunda hem de anlatım boyutunda ortaya çıkaran kişi diyebiliriz. Bu konuda birçok satıcıya faydalı oldu ve yeni bir konsept geliştirdi aslında. Şimdi kendisinden rica ettim bize hem bu konu hakkında hem genel Amazon tecrübeleri hakkında bilgilerini aktaracak. Hey, yeah, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing good. Excited to share some insights, have some discussions.
Actually, we have a common friend, Evelyn Demirov. He also lives in Montreal. He is one of the names I really respect in Amazon community, and I know that Evelyn has a lot of respect for Yev. He had mentioned his name a couple of times to me. So I reached out to Yev and I asked if he would be interested in just sharing some insight with the Turkish community. Well, I'm so thankful that I'm having you and I'm hosting you today. So today I would like to start with the geo-ranking. I think you are one of the first names that came up with this terminology in Amazon world. Like it always existed at some point, like people knew about it, but I think it became a big thing with AMZ Jet. Like, could you explain us how it got to that point and how you started developing applications on this?
Yeah, the basic history of it was, and absolutely true, where different ideas of geo-ranking was around for a while, and I know like you posted about it way before than I started talking about it, but for me, I'm coming from a marketing perspective and have another software. I'm always thinking about marketing and especially Facebook ads and Amazon. So when I first started thinking about GeoRank, I thought it from the perspective, how can Amazon brand sellers optimize their marketing better? That's the angle I was coming from. And then I know whether it's in the world of Google or just website optimization, you have to start making more personalization of the content and delivery of the content of which potential customer is seeing what. So I know that was the case. And then I thought, well, like in Amazon, that makes sense too. Depending on the purchase behavior, how people are buying, there should be different effect, or Amazon should be showing different content depending on who's searching or who's like just basically their behavior. And then I realized, well, like one, Amazon doesn't really give us much data, right? And then two, a lot of the third-party software, which are like our main ways of finding out more information about Amazon, there wasn't anything to quickly measure some of these different metrics that are really good for external marketing on how can you make Amazon sales more effective through external marketing. And there's all of these different manual ways of doing it, but they're always very time consuming. So it's just one of those things that I started digging in deep and then getting engineers involved and trying to automate processes of being able to get into like what is actually geo-ranking, what does it mean, and then realizing there's different factors, and we'll discuss that, but seeing that that there's different value for different brands depending on how you're approaching GeoRank.
Well, actually, like a little time ago, maybe a year ago or something, I was talking to some admins of some other English Facebook groups, and they were like, maybe you shouldn't talk so much about geo-ranking, it might confuse people. I think at some point, like, they didn't want people to know about it because it actually comes to the point that your products will be ranked better if you send more inventory in. I don't know if you agree on this. We will talk about it. And then it also means that you will have to spend more capital on your inventory, because if you send just a little bit to Amazon, Amazon is more likely to store it in one or two, or at least, like, at most, let's say a couple of warehouses. So in the locations that your product is not available, or let's say in the locations that it's going to take a while when a customer orders a product to receive it, your ranking will suffer a little bit. So what are your findings on this? Like, do you agree that more inventory eventually means better BSR and better ranking?
Yeah, absolutely. And at first I wasn't sure where I was able to measure it. And then I wanted to see what are brands saying, because brands individually started measuring and then having a lot of discussions and seeing data at scale. is where being able to see the patterns. So one of the things I've actually started thinking about it a little bit differently that made it clear that that pattern is true, where more inventory is more sales. There's all kinds of exceptions to that. We can talk about that, but also you have to determine, like, is it a causal relationship or correlational, meaning that is it because a brand is growing more, so they have more inventory, and yes, they're going to have more sales, or a combination of you send in more and you're actually going to get more sales. And I think that's an interesting distinction where with everything else all equal, just the process of you sending more inventory, are you going to get more sales exactly from that? And I think the answer is yes. And this is because where a lot of brands, even advanced brands, the ones that either they have high sales volume or when they were thinking about inventory before, they thought that, all right, I'm in stock or I'm out of stock. You know, like I have my schedule of, you know, like 8 weeks out or maybe like 10-day overlap between when I'm sending in inventory. But that understanding is based on total inventory out of stock or not. Meaning that, let's say for US, yes, I'm in stock. I have 1,000 units. Of course I'm in stock. But then I realized that looking at the data further, there's individual warehouses. And I remember before when I was leading marketing for a company, I was looking at the Amazon data all the time, is that there were way less number of warehouses that our inventory was in. So even though we had thousands of units, that it was, it kind of varied between like 20 and 50 individual warehouses where you can see that the products are being shipped out. And then I noticed where kind of over the years, there's more and more warehouses. And I think that's just the nature of Amazon growing and having more individual warehouses. So now it's hundreds of warehouses across the world, right? Like the actual Amazon individual warehouses, not just the distribution centers, but where the inventory is stored. And I think in US, it's like around 100, or I think there's more, but I think easily you can identify 100. So when you have 1,000 units, what that means is that in the popular cities or metro areas, that there may be like 5 of them where there's like a few hundred units each. And then there's like 75 other warehouses where there's like 1 unit, 5 units, 10 units, you know, very small amounts that adds up. So then the sellers started realizing, and then that's where I kind of like summarized all of the different patterns, is that even though you're fully in stock, you're actually out of stock in certain individual warehouses. And whether it's like temporal out of stock, meaning like just in time where Amazon may be transferring inventory. So you think you're in stock as California and New York, Florida is good, but you kind of like sold your 1 unit somewhere in Montana, and then Amazon is transferring some more units. So you're like temporarily out of stock. It may be a few hours, it may be a day. So during that time, what happens? Are you ranking lower? Or is your BSR affecting your buy box? And we didn't know that before. Now it's becoming more and more clear that your inventory isn't there. So Amazon is just going to prioritize the customer experience. They're just going to rank another brand higher that has a similar product or similar reviews to kind of accomplish that experience.
Yeah, Amazon really cares about the shipment duration. I mean, they really want the customer to receive the product as fast as they can. It is one of their priorities. So the idea is, if you don't have any product in a warehouse, it means that when a customer orders your product, Amazon will have to ship it from somewhere else, probably somewhere which is further away. So it is going to take longer time than a product which already exists in the warehouse that you are not available right now. So that actually leads your products to rank worse or lose ranking for customers who are searching for that keyword on that specific location where the warehouse is or where the warehouse is connected to. I also noticed something else, probably you know about it. I'm not going to share which zip code and which state I'm talking about right now, actually, because it takes more data to test it. I don't want to give misinformation to anybody. But I noticed that it is easier to rank your products in some of the states. Did you come across with this? Because like I made some tests, and in some certain states, in some certain zip codes, the weight of one purchase is giving you more ranking. Did you find something similar?
Interestingly, so one part I have, but in a slightly different way. I have it in terms of observing it across a lot of brands, because I'm seeing so much data where it's kind of like hidden by other patterns. So when individually people tell me like maybe something similar where there's certain ranking effect, and then another brand tells me the opposite, I'm like, oh, dang, well, another brand, something else, so what's going on? And because it's other factors. So because I'm seeing so many exceptions, it's hard to find those patterns. But overall, I hear those examples. I just haven't identified exactly where I can say, all right, 70% of the time, go for these zip codes that are correlated with like income or something like that, or distance to the major metropolitan area. At some point, I want to identify patterns where I can say something that's generalized like that, but right now I haven't. But definitely I've heard of examples like that, whether it's certain like zip codes or cities or certain regions.
Yeah, I don't want to come into any conclusion right now because my data set is kind of limited with my own data. But you, on the other hand, have, I think, a lot of data on AMZ Jet that you might come to a conclusion at some point. So we would like to hear some about how AMZ Jet is helping out customers. And like, if I just start out, if I'm just starting out, if I'm just making like sales of maybe 15 per day, 20 per day, if I'm a like small sized seller, is it suitable for me to use it or find any insight on the software?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what I'm seeing is a diversity of users. So you have to understand what is the goal you might want to be looking at GeoRank, and then how do you leverage it? One of the things we talked about earlier is inventory. So for some, it's like, all right, well, I'll send more inventory. What does that mean? A lot more capital, right? A lot more planning. So that may not be a realistic solution to some brands, but still, you may put more time in your decision on how much inventory do I send, 100 units, 500 units, and then just being more careful with your math where, all right, how much can I actually afford, because it's going to be like whether it's going to sell or not, is it the holidays or not, things like that. So put more time into that decision of how much you can actually send. For other brands, this is where I'm like a lot more excited about when it comes to marketing, and can you actually do anything that's marketing related? And this is more for beginners or advanced brands. There's two different scenarios. One thing that I'm seeing is like one, how to use this data. If you're looking at ranking and you're actually ranking differently in different states, like what does it mean? Is it consistent or not? So one of the things is your rank in a state, it depends on one, your own brand, but also competitors, right? Like how much inventory do they have regionally? So one of the approaches you can think of is, do you want to go the more aggressive route or more conservative route? Meaning that there's the best selling regions, right? Whether it's like, let's say in US, California, Florida, New York, Texas, it's like the top 4 states for most brands. But again, that means it's harder to rank there, and it's just more sales, more competition, like in those regions. And then there's a lot of other states that are like lower volume, which depends on customer psychology or social factors on other regions. So do you want to go the route where, let me experiment going after the lower selling states, which means they may be easier to rank. So if you're on a lower budget, you're a beginner, that may be an easier win, where it's like, all right, here's these states that there's just less competition because there's like less states. So in your advertising, whether it's Google ads or Facebook ads or even your own email marketing, your strategies, like, well, focus your budget into just a few states, as opposed to normally you just do nationwide targeting, right? And you can do this in Amazon PPC, where like, all right, I want to target certain states maybe in the future, but in external marketing, so choose a few states. So then your budget is more focused rather than spread out into states where like maybe you're far, like you just don't have warehouses there, so you're kind of wasting Facebook ad budget. So one of the things is being more focused with your budget on selecting just a few states, and that are like less competitive states. So that's one approach. The opposite approach is being more aggressive, where you actually want to like combat, like you want to go after the high selling states. One of the things you can start looking is volatility of this data. So I only started thinking about this the past couple of months. Like first couple of months is like, all right, is there a difference between states or not? And once I realized there was, is that what is the volatility of that ranking? Meaning that even though California could be ranked, like better than Arizona or some other state, I've noticed that it's different for brands of over time. Is it like volatile or not? Meaning the more volatile it is, the less stable it is. So some states are actually more volatile or not. And then I'm finding that some keywords are more volatile than others. So then when it comes into like keyword research strategies, you can start seeing, are there products and categories, keywords that naturally are just more volatile, meaning there's more competition, there's a lot more like ranking campaigns and more marketing. So it may be easier to kind of like start ranking, but it's also easier to lose that rank because it's so volatile. So depending on your comfort, some brands are maybe like, all right, I just want to start really small. I want to go with like easy marketing, but something that's more stable. Then maybe you look at keywords that have less volatility. So I've been looking at those types of metrics for the past couple of months and realizing where, all right, there's something in volatility. It matters because Amazon sees all of this data.
In this case, do you have any suggestions for people to how to have some control over which state they are going to be sending their inventory to?
Yeah, so in terms of sending their inventory to the states, like overall, and this is me following the discussion in the community, what sellers are saying, where like you have either like 0 to little control. There's some things you could do to increase the chance, but generally the most common is that you send inventory to Amazon to a distribution center, and then from that they distribute it to the 50 warehouse or 100 warehouse. That's the most common. There's things you can do, whether you want to try to do FBM or seller fulfilled prime. There's like the FBA on-site where you're kind of like a mix between FBA and FBM, where you kind of have more control of covering everywhere. And I kind of heard some people say, well, like maybe you could do certain things to like manipulate where inventory is going. I don't know if those are things where Amazon is like paying close attention and maybe that's going to be stopped. So I don't know if there's something that's like a proven method of making sure that inventory is where the highest potential sales are.
One thing you might try to do is actually changing your ship from address to that zip code that you want, the location that you want. So presumably Amazon is going to give you the closest warehouse, but I'm saying presumably because excuse me, it doesn't always work. But sometimes actually Amazon just happens to be nice and gives you the closest warehouse. So you might try to increase your chances by changing your ships from address. So I will show you something. I want to know if you will agree on this with me. So I'm just going to demonstrate my crazy drawing skills here. So this is our X and Y axes. And so let's say this is the number 1 ranking here. And this is time. So what I usually see is, it feels like there are some resistant points. So the ranking starts like this. It goes up, comes to like top 5 position, goes down, comes up. This is, let's say, 100th position. But I think Amazon wants to be persuaded. So it feels like Amazon almost wants you to prove yourself that you are going to be stable with your sales. So as it goes like this, until some point, the fluctuations, the volatility starts changing. So after you are persistent, the jumps between the lines become smaller like this. Did you also notice something similar like this graph?
Yeah, I have. I'm thinking about it slightly different though. So when you're drawing this and you're having the fluctuations, those fluctuations now, again, this is like getting complex, maybe not the simplified version, but that graph is actually the sum of all kinds of scenarios. One, and it depends on what tool you're using to measure keyword rank, but usually like you're just seeing a snapshot where it could be just like one random state or one random time or certain device or browser. So those fluctuations, another way of the way I'm picturing now is when you were drawing that, I thought, well, what if there's 50 lines, let's say like 50 states, then there's a different line for every state. And some states are more consistent, some are more are fluctuating. So that line is actually regionally, there's a difference. And this is way more recently where we started tracking also mobile versus desktop separately, even though like people like normally do that, but we try to make it systematic where like, well, like you just plug it in and you can see desktop and mobile rank, and we're seeing that sometimes desktop is more stable rank over time and mobile is fluctuating. So does that depend on the customers, the type of marketing you're doing? So the fluctuations you were drawing, one, it could be hourly fluctuations, it could be because the regions are inherently within that variation, or one, if we split those up, there's mobile and desktop differences. But overall, I agree the pattern that as Amazon has sales history data, then it's going to stabilize more, regardless what device it is or what regions. So overall, that makes sense. But then there's all of these factors. So, and if you see the opposite pattern, is it because inventory was more important, or is it because mobile versus desktop was really important for that type of product or that audience? And like the reason I've actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, one other observation that I made before, I made a post about this really interesting. I know like others have talked about this too, is that as a customer, when you're shopping on Amazon, and if you're like changing the zip code of like the actual delivery address, whether you change your account of like how you're logged into Amazon, or the zip code where, you know, there's like the little button that says, receive your order by Wednesday in 8 hours and things like that. So when I was trying to check GeoRank, one of the things that was obvious is that when you're changing that address around, and then I was comparing this to backend data that I know about inventory stock, is that as soon as you're going further away from warehouses, that little like time slot changes. Like sometimes it adds an hour, it takes away an hour on like when you need to order. So there's hourly fluctuations that totally depend on actual time, on like when the person is ordering. Has nothing to do with mobile versus desktop or broader regions. It's more like micro regions, probably how the person is located relative to the inventory. What you were saying earlier about that Amazon is really prioritizing the one-day shipping or the shipping speed. So these fluctuations, I think it's a combination of all of that, and we're only like now starting to get an idea of like what are those fluctuations to explain them.
So I think many people are using Helium 10's product tracker. I also have my own personal one, but I also use Helium 10's and a couple of other softwares as well. So actually, I would like to clarify it to the audience as much as I could. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. But I think that they're only using a specific zip code for tracking your ranking. So let's say let's say they are using a zip code from Los Angeles, actually your product might be performing exactly the opposite, or at least let's say very differently in the East Coast, right? Like, so it might not be enough for you if you are only using one tracker at a time, because you can be like, oh, you know what? I lost all my ranking. I'm checking the tracker and it shows me on the 50th position. I used to be the second position and now I lost 48 rankings. Actually, it might be happening only in one zip code, whereas on the other zip codes, you might be gaining ranking. So I think this is where AMZ Jet is making the difference in this like software world, that you guys are showing the product's ranking in each of the states, so that actually you can see how you are performing in different zip codes in different states. And if you, then actually it's a super broad topic, but let's talk about it a little bit. Mm-hmm. So let's say that you are performing super good on the east side, but on the west side, on Los Angeles and around, you are struggling. And you are going to make some giveaways to make it better. The thing is, if the person who purchases your product is actually from the east side, it might not be as helpful as finding somebody from the west side, because you are struggling on the west side and you are already performing good on the east side. So the idea is, if you are going to be making a giveaway, especially on, let's say, Facebook and ManyChat, you might want to target people on the west side, because this is exactly where you are struggling. What do you think about this? Do you think it makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So to summarize also, or paraphrase just in a different way, but what you were talking about is, I also use Helium 10, and especially like the hourly tracker, and I feel like it serves a different goal, and also seeing where it's a better question for them, like exactly technically how they're doing it. But I think discussions that I've seen of how they're doing it is how you're saying, where they do check different regions, but they're showing you like a data point on like depending on like when the hourly check happens. So I don't think it's like the average of everything, but it's across that variation, which means that like statistically that's actually good. It's how you see a general pattern where you take a whole bunch of measurements and you kind of see how it is like all over the place. So you see that variability. So I think that's good. But then if you're taking measurements across regions, can you check every single region, the same region, and every single hour? That would be like the best, but that would actually take a lot of data. It's actually like really expensive anyway, of like running data across so many different regions. So I think it's kind of like different goals of the data that you're seeing, and they're accomplishing different reasons, different goals. Now, if let's say East Coast versus West Coast, this is like I know we're talking about a lot of factors, and then it might get like complex, but I actually have a takeaway from this, kind of like to simplify it. What listeners can do is to try to identify how is your brand distributed. And you may know this, but I've noticed a lot of brands, even advanced ones, like they don't know like where is their inventory like balance in their distribution, meaning that I'm finding out that some brands, they're like heavily inventories on the East Coast. Yes, there's inventory in Texas or like on the East Coast or like West Coast, it's distributed, but sometimes it's dominated on West Coast, sometimes dominated on the East Coast. And some brands, I think this is the best way to do it, is that it's everywhere. It's kind of like distributed like same amount of units across different regions. And again, it's hard to control. That's a whole different questions. But step one is to be aware of where you fit in. First, know your inventory. And you can like do this all from like manually imports. You can do this in AMZ-Jet. There's like different ways where you can do this to know your inventory regionally, because what's happening is that exactly what you were saying. If you're just dominant in a certain region and somebody is, let's say like in California, that's where like most of your inventory is on western part of US, and a customer is searching from Florida, it's going to take slightly extra time to ship it. So for Amazon, it's all about the customer experience. They're just going to rank another brand higher that has inventory right there. And it's cheaper for Amazon. They don't want to take a whole bunch of your stock and ship it from California to Florida. Like, yes, they do that, but they do that at minimal amounts as far as their internal analytics show. So then you could start taking on action. And it could be more of like a beginner tip that if you're running ads externally, run ads where you know you have inventory. So it'll just increase your chance that someone will buy, you'll rank higher, because like you know that when someone is there, they'll say like, oh yeah, order in 4 hours and you'll get it by, within the next 2 days. Like your advertising costs actually may be higher because you're targeting, but it's a better value per dollar spent per purchase, and kind of like affecting the Amazon algorithm. You'll want to try to be able to do that. So then how do you actually solve, well, how can you be everywhere? This is the harder part. And then, your suggestion before of trying to ship, making sure that the distribution center in different areas, then they might send more there, trying to get the FBA on-site program or fulfillment by merchant in certain regions.
Yeah, you added something very valuable, because actually what I said was kind of incomplete. The thing is, you might want to do giveaways targeting the East Coast to gain ranking, but as you have added, like if you don't have enough inventory there, it's not going to make any good, because you are already low on inventory, and you are going to make a giveaway on that low inventory, and maybe on the East Coast, your inventory is going to go down to the critical condition. So it's not going to help you without measuring your own inventory to make giveaways. Like you have to first know in what zip codes, how many, not zip code, but let's say states, how many units you have. I have a final question just to have your input again. So we know that Amazon wants to increase the conversion as much as they can. So they are trying to come up with all these like personalized things. You look at this product, maybe you would like this one as well. And then all these things we have been talking about, the zip codes, inventory. Do you think Amazon is going to go to more personalized results page at the end? So because right now they customize it to some point. But do you think at some point it will be like you will see complete different products when you search for something? Not like, I mean, 100% completely different, but maybe 50%, 60% different products than what I see. Do you think it's evolving towards there, or is something like very far away?
Yeah, well, there's two parts. One is like maybe even further far away that I want to talk about a little bit, but that's I'll get to that in a second. So the first one is like I feel like that's already it's there, and this is very brand specific, very region specific. Is that when you're searching, these regional rank differences for a lot of brands, a lot of keywords are like it's a lot of like spots. It's like 10, 20 positions.
Just to add here, what I'm saying is not about the locations, but let's say I've been buying computer mouses, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you say mice for this, right? Computer mouses. So, and in my history, I have always bought black computer mouses with a cable.
Yeah.
Because I like to play shooter games, whatever. So now when I search for mouse, Amazon can actually keep history of mine and say that, oh, this guy, Yeet, he likes to buy black computer mouses, black computer gaming mouses. This has been his preference for the last 5 years. So It is better for me to suggest them black computer mouses with weird lights coming out on the side. I mean, do you think it's even I mean, it might be too much, but it's very personalized.
Yeah. So this was actually the main reason I wanted to launch GeoRank measuring, because I thought that's why, like, that would be the main reason to launch it, to track it, to try to take advantage of that, because the better you understand your audience and your marketing, you could really know on like who's going to be going to your page and are they going to purchase or not. I thought that because kind of like coming back full circle, how at the beginning of our call, I talked about how Google does this, right? When you search, it already shows you results that are different. And then before I even launched GeoRank, I started researching Amazon.com, like the actual website, different tools that they have, like all of the apps and plugins they have on the actual Amazon.com. You can do this with Built With or other tools where you can see like what the website has installed. And there's all of these like regional and geolocation-based analytics that they have installed, whether it's like Adobe or there's all kinds of tools that enable this personalization. So I thought, well, it makes sense. And then I started looking at just like Amazon jobs, like who they're hiring. And then in job descriptions, you can see where there's like people talking about someone that has experience doing something like regional or geo-targeted type of features for other companies. So I'm like, all right, that makes sense. They're going to be implementing regional features. And I'm actually in Seattle, Washington. That's where I live or nearby. So I kind of meet with colleagues and hear them talking about things. They're like, oh yeah, we're working on this type of geolocation feature, not like ranking related, just something else that's like price or other features, but it's like they're thinking about regions. And also the other part of the question, this is like maybe more out there, is can Amazon sellers modify their listing and choose where in California, I want it to be this title for the same product, your one product. For Texas, I want it to be this title. That's getting like really fine. That's how you increase conversion rates. I don't know if Amazon will give us that option as like sellers to actually modify listings like that, but it would make sense in terms of conversion rate. You can split test it. I don't know if Amazon is going to make as much money in PPC where you like, all right, I don't want to spend money here because there's no customers. Right now they're kind of like sending the budget everywhere, because you may not want to advertise where there's like let's say no lakes or no oceans, but you're selling a product that has something to do with water or not. So I think it's going to be a big decision to allow that much personalization in the actual settings that sellers can customize. So I think that's when I launched. I'm like, all right, this is like getting excited, because it's how Amazon sellers can stay ahead of the competition by customizing more. But right now, I don't know if that's something that Amazon may launch sometime this year or in a year. But you already have regional targeting and Amazon DSP. Like that's there. So to me, it's like, all right, that's a sign where they're letting sellers like in some form of advertising choose regions. So at some point it may come into PPC or other regions. So let's start talking about this and measuring it now. That way, like we're way ahead compared to every seller will know about, like geo-targeting or regional type of strategies.
One last thing, actually, this was my last question, but I will add one more. And about PPC, like we talked about ranking, we talked about geo-ranking, we talked about how inventory affects geo-ranking, and lastly about PPC. Okay, so people, let's say most people, they think that, you know, the higher I put the bid, the more impressions I will get, and you know, eventually more sales I'll make. But actually, what people miss is it is not only about how high your bid is. It's also about the performance of your campaign. So I might be bidding less than you will be bidding, and I will be still getting more impressions, or I will be positioned higher than you, even though you put more bid than me, because my campaign has more weight and it has been performing better. So do you think location will be one of the factors that how many impressions you will be getting because your ads are performing simply better in a geography? Do you think it's possible or will be possible?
Yeah, my perspective, and again, I don't have visibility into Amazon PPC, so then for me it's speculating where I think it does, and this is also based on me hearing from others where I know Steve Simonson made a post somewhere where he just like with his Amazon colleagues where like he knows they're working on or it was already implemented where anything having to do with PPC, there's data in there that's regional based. And Amazon has the data, right? Like how much it's in the algorithm or not, I think that's unknown, but then others have said that that's probably the case. And maybe not in the context of geo-ranking, more about that regions play a role in PPC. And I know Danny McMillan also is like pushing those questions on like how is this relevant or not in terms of like Amazon PPC. So PPC isn't my expertise on Amazon, but it makes total sense. I think this is where I'm starting to get some features that are ranking or geo-ranking based with PPC. I don't know if it's going to be relevant in any way. I have to look at the data, but it's starting to see, can you actually like measure rank regional that's coming from PPC? Right now it's everything organically we're talking about, so I think that'll show us a sign, like is it random, is it like based regionally a little bit. So it's a very, very good theory. I think there's something in there. We just have to kind of like keep pushing it and seeing.
Well, to our viewers that we were able to keep with us, because today we are talking about some like data oriented stuff that, you know, most viewers don't like so much. You know, people like, I mean, if I put something like, you know what, we sold 200,000 last month, I will have 100,000 views. But if I talk about data and how we actually did that, then I will get 2,000 views. It's the bitter truth. But now I would just give the viewers a little tip. You should visit AMZ Jet without even making a purchase, just to understand how geo ranking might help you in your sales, because it is a point of view. Like whether you use the software or not, it doesn't. You don't have to even use it. But the thing you should understand is the mentality of how Amazon is evolving and the way it is going. So I'm very excited to have hosted you today here. I think you guys are building the actually feature strategies of Amazon. Like, I mean, there are some gurus that I respect, but it's changing, you know, like you can use the old strategies so many times. After some time, they become irrelevant, and we need now some fresh blood to see the new implementations on Amazon world, and I think you are one of them who is carrying the flag. I'm looking forward to host you again.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Hope it was helpful. And if there's questions that are coming up, I'll kind of like be around on like where the video is posted and try to answer as well. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.